Hi, and welcome to the Reclamation Project podcast. We are so glad that you're here, that you're listening, and hopefully that you are a part of the conversation. Today, we are really just diving into, again, the concept of love, relationships, and marriage. But this time, we're kind of looking at it from a different perspective, and that is from the point and perspective of being single. Now, I want to stop here and say what I've been saying during every podcast that we've been doing during this series, and that is that married people, if you are listening, this is not a time to tune out and to turn off, but this is something that I believe you need to hear too, because being single is hard, and you may have friends, relatives, co-workers who are single, and I think you need to maybe hear some of what they're going through and some of what we're going to say about what they're going through. So please, I would say, please listen to this. Please take note of it and not just turn it off or tune out, but really look at this and look at those relationships that you have with single people and how you interact with them as we talk through the things that we talk through here. So now that's been said, we are going to talk about really, I think what I've deemed, and hopefully I will title it this once we edit and post this podcast, but the beauty of being single. And that I think is sometimes not the way that people perceive being single. Being single is sometimes looked at as a hardship, as something they want to get out of and get into a relationship or a marriage, but there really is a beauty to being single, and there's so much that we can do with the concept of being single. I actually had a person that I knew who contacted me a couple weeks ago on Facebook and said, "You know what? I'm really not liking where I'm at with this single life." And I tried to convince them that, hey, this is a great spot. This is where God has you, you know? And so don't take it lightly and just continue to move through it and continue to seek after him and continue to embrace it until God moves you out of it. Because this is a place where you have a different sphere of influence than I do, a different ability to move and work for God than I do as a married person who has a couple kids. You are uniquely positioned as a single person to work for God where you're at. So we'll go into that a little bit, but there is beauty to being single, and there is an amazingness to being single.
And when you were saying that, that prompted a couple things, Jeremy. It really prompted three things. Not only is it beautiful, I got to tell you, it might not feel beautiful. Now, I'm not the perfect, or even perfect would be a far stretch, but I'm not even really a good person to even reference this, because my wife was 16 when we got married. I had just turned 20. And so like the last time I was single, I was a junior in high school almost. So I don't know what beauty of singleness is, but I will tell you from a couple of different places. And singleness can be, I've yet to be married, or if you listen to a past podcast about divorce, I'm single now because of a divorce. Even that has its own beauty, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But as I sit with people who are single, maybe in their 20s, mid-20s, late 20s, and they're starting to feel funny about that. They wouldn't be one who would listen to this and initially agree that it's beautiful, based on the cultural concepts of what it means to be single, family pressure, when your mailman's trying to set you up with a date for with his sister. All those things happen, I understand. But it's been my experience over time that whenever I've met somebody searching so hard to find somebody, it's just like they never found someone. And when they begin to relax in their singleness is when God brought across their path someone who would eventually become either their spouse or significant other. So don't try so hard. In this series on beauty of being single, I'm going to ask you to relax and take a deep breath. Live in the moment. We've talked about that as we talked about happiness every single podcast. It's learning to live in the moment and the moment of what it means to be single. Now, I can tell you from all my studies, what I think Scripture says is that I believe 98.5% of the people on this planet will have someone. There are some that Apostle Paul said, maybe you should be like I am and be single. He was married to his ministry, and that's okay. I can tell you from a man who's married in ministry, both are difficult to maneuver. But if you go all the way back I think the first time we started the marriage relationship series, Genesis 1 and 2, God created everything. And as he created one day, he stepped back and he said, wow, this is really good. He created the second day and stepped back and said, this is good. The first time we see not good in Scripture, still before the fall, he looked at Adam and said, Adam, it is not good that you're alone. I mean, I think he created us for relationship. And I think where people make the mistake is when they worry so much about being single that they settle. They get their S's messed up. Singleness and settling. And, I joke around with people who have settled and now they're coming to me as they're working on a divorce, realizing that I push the issue. So if you find yourself single for whatever reason, I hope that you'll listen to this podcast and say, this is my time to take a deep breath, to live in the moment and learn the lessons that I could only learn being single.
Yeah, and so I just want to back up a little bit there to what you said. Is sometimes you feel the societal pressure, sometimes you feel the family pressure as a single person. That's kind of what I came out of. Is I was working at a church, and I felt the pressure. I'd probably say from when I was 23, that man, what's wrong with Jeremy? He needs to get married. Same thing.
I didn't mean that when I said.
Yeah,
that.
I know, joking. Right? But also, from a family pressures, I felt the pressure from my family that, man, I remember my dad saying a couple of times, I was your age when I met your mom, hint, hint.
Yeah.
So I think there is a pressure to really figure out who that person is. And like you said, I think that sometimes that becomes a settling, it's okay to be single, and I think people who are married, who have single friends, family members, coworkers, etc., you need to know also that it's okay for them to be single.
Yeah.
There is a beauty in being single, and there is an essence of being single that God works with. I mean, he worked through Paul.
Yep. Absolutely.
Who was single. He worked through other people who were single. I mean, singleness opens up so many avenues to what God can do. Mm-hmm. And when you have people pressuring you outside of that to get married, to find someone, to settle down, I think that in essence we're trying to push someone into maybe what God doesn't want at that moment.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll tell you what happens there. In fact, I'm working with a young lady that my wife knows, and in fact, my wife asked me the other day, what would you do if you were single? And I said, is this a random question, or are you trying to tell me something? Well, it was a random question for all you listeners at home. And as I was saying, I would be hard to be single in this day and age. But because you get confused by your emotions. And if you find yourself single, confused by emotions of pressure, as Jeremy mentioned, sometimes your church, I'm thinking about that, Jeremy. So when you're a 24-year-old intern working at church with young people, I think parents think, oh, if you were married, it'd be different. I don't mind my 15-year-old daughter riding in a van with you if you had a wife.
Well, and I have to say, and I'm not pinning it all on this, but I felt that that's the reason why I was being overlooked when positions were opened.
Oh, I would agree. Yeah.
And it was like, well, we can't do it with anything with Jeremy until he gets married, because then he's available to be used
but no pressure, Jeremy.
Yeah, in regular ministry.
So if you get confused by the other emotion is we have stuck the term loneliness and singleness together, and it doesn't really have to be that way. I was sitting with a a young girl. She's 27, and that'll tell you how old I am when a 27-year-old's a young girl. But she was just upset about being single. She knew enough. She'd set a boundary that she wasn't going to settle. But Friday nights, when she's sitting home, watching How I Met Your Mother with a bag of Doritos.
How I Met Your Mother was on Monday nights, by the way.
Well, she was sitting home on a Monday night. She taped it on Monday, was watching it Friday.
Okay.
That's what it was. And she was crying about what it was like to be single and lonely. And I don't usually counsel this way. I don't look at people and say, I know you feel sad because you don't have shoes, but look at that person. He doesn't have feet. I never really think that's a constructive form. But I did tell her, I said, you know what? I understand that you feel like you're lonely on a Friday night, but you have to know, hon, that I work with women who are married, been married for years, and they're in a horrible relationship. They are lonely every single day from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed. Now, are they married? Do they have a ring? Yes, but they're equally lonely, if not more lonely. And someone would look at you and it would trade their loneliness for yours. So if you get overwhelmed or confused by the word lonely, you really ought to define that. Loneliness, I think, really is a state of mind too. Loneliness is sometimes a message screaming, "Hey, get to know yourself a little bit. Get to like yourself." If you just don't like spending time with yourself, then sometimes you use a relationship to buffer that, and then you're married 8 or 10 years into it, and you're like, I remember how fun that was when I was single. Now, Jeremy, you waited till you were 28 when you got married?
I was 28.
Yep. And what were some of your friends? They were married earlier. What was it like to be the single guy around married family and friends?
I mean, that was difficult. I mean, because when people get married who are around you, it's a different dynamic. Mm-hmm. And so you see them less, first of all. Second of all is not only do you see them less, but they tend to not be involved with you anymore because they're working so much on their marriage. And the other thing for me is I had a lot of friends who were girls. So when they would get married, that friendship's gone. Same thing when I got married is I moved away from a lot of the friends that I had that were girls. It's just not something that's productive towards marriage. Yeah. So I totally understand it, but at the same time is that's kind of when they're getting married, you lose that friend, no matter if it's a guy or a girl. You just do for different different reasons.
If you're thinking back, I think we all do this, and it's one of those things. Even when we talked in a past podcast about communication with your spouse or significant other and having the freedom and the safety just to say your point of view, but sometimes you just don't get to do that because you're just not sure how it's going to be received. Like if I was to sit there and say to my wife, well, if I would have waited to get married, I would have liked to do this and this and this. That would probably not have been a productive thing to say. Yet there is truth in that. And yes. I think my wife was 16 when we got married, and no, she wasn't, for all you Baptists out there who need to know. But I remember when she turned 30 and she was really depressed because she'd almost been married half her life. And that was hard on my ego. I felt like I did a bad thing marrying her. But she always looks back and thinks about all the different things she didn't get to do. It's not good or bad, right or wrong. It's just a fact. The things that she didn't get to travel. She didn't get to, pursue certain interests. When we were dating, she had a scholarship. She even today is just a great artist. She'll deny that when she hears it, but she got a scholarship to go to an art school. But we were engaged or dating heavily and getting engaged, and it's just you always put those things. Love blinds you at that point. Okay. So at risk of having a fight when you go home, what are some of the things, maybe singleness, if you would have lived in the moment at 26 and 27, that you might have done that you didn't do?
Well, I had an opportunity, actually. I don't know if it was an opportunity so much as an ideal of an opportunity to go and live in Scotland for a year. And that's something that I didn't pursue. It's not because I was getting married, but it's something that when I was single, I had the opportunity to do. And now that I look back on it, I wish I would have pursued that. And I wish I would have had that experience. But at this point in my life, with kids, with marriage, I just wouldn't do that at this point. And so that was an opportunity that man, I wish I would have done knowing what I know now, and experience that.
I was kind of mentoring and or doing life with a young man. He's probably 33, and he's single, brilliant young man, attractive from a female perspective. Great job. He's one of those guys, and he just travels. He is just a traveler. And one day we were having coffee, and he was showing me all the pictures. There was a picture of him on a camel looking at the pyramids in Egypt. There's a picture of him walking on the Great Wall in China. He's been just about everywhere. And I looked at him one day, but he said, but I would love to be married. And I said, what would be cool? Go when you find a wife. Go back and have your picture taken in those exact same spots with your spouse, and replicate those pictures with your spouse, because it speaks to both the beauty of singleness and just the wonderfulness of marriage. I think it does both.
Yeah. Well, and that is what is beautiful about being single, is you have those opportunities. I think I said it in a previous podcast that, one of the things about marriage is you don't have that autonomy anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You have to check in, when you want to do something, when you want to buy something, when you have the desire to move or to go here or there. You don't. The beauty of singleness is you don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you have the means, you can do those things and you can have those experiences. And if you're so bogged down with the thought of getting married and finding that person, chances are you're not living those things and being in those experiences to the fullest that you can.
Yeah.
And not only those experiences that let you have fun, but those experiences that really God is putting in front of you in order to use you for his glory.
Now, the people that I deal with mostly that are single aren't single by choice. They're not so much the young college students anymore. They're those who've been single based on the fact that they're divorced. So not only to add to the societal pressures and the feelings of loneliness, now I have guilt and shame and failure and self-loathing, questioning and doubting everything I said or did. So you add that to singleness too, and it'll bog you down. I remember, I don't know if you remember, Jeremy, in those days when we used to take hundreds of kids to Magic Mountain.
Oh, goodness.
Oh,
those days.
Yeah.
Those days.
I still have scars from that.
Mental or emotional or physical?
I have both, or all of the above.
Spiritual.
We got there early, and so as we're waiting for this, we'd always go, all the leaders would go across to a little coffee shop, and we'd sit and have coffee, prepare ourselves for a long day with junior high and high school students. So there was maybe 6 or 7 adult leaders sitting around the table, and I just like to ask questions, random questions, get conversation happening. And so I went around the room, and I knew all the leaders, and I said, so if your spouse would pass away, would you remarry again? Most said, no, I don't think so. Some said yes. One guy said yes way too quick, which bothered me. Went to the lady, and she knows who she is. She was sitting there. She goes, oh, I could never remarry again. And I said, okay. And she goes, well, what about you, Gary? I said, nope, I don't think I could remarry again. She goes, but yes, you would. I said, no, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't. She goes, but you're such a people person. You couldn't be alone. I said, I didn't say I'd be alone. I just said I wasn't going to be married, which was a joke, honey, if you're listening to this. But the fact is, understanding the joys of marriage and relationship that we've talked about in our past podcast would even change the way I would look at singleness. I wouldn't look at it. I would be lonely for the loss of a spouse. We're not getting divorced. I'm talking about if something bad happened. But it would change my outlook. So I all that to say, I think singleness is a mindset too, as well as just a fact of relationship.
Well, and I think something that you said earlier, and I wanted to touch on this, but I was waiting for the moment, is is where you said in Genesis, God saw Adam and said, it's not good for you to be alone. Mm-hmm. You need relationship. And I think a lot of people equate relationship in that ideal as it has to be marriage.
Correct.
And the thing is when you need to have a relationship, And when you feel that yearning and that desire as a single person to have a relationship, that doesn't always flow to marriage. That can flow to, hey, you know, I need to have these really close friendships that spur me on towards the cause of Christ, that or that that keep me accountable, or you know, that I can, you know, mentor somebody or be mentored by somebody. And that's the beauty of singleness too, is it opens you up to have those relationships. Yep. Because when you're married, when you have kids, time is the most fleeting thing in the world.
Correct. Yeah.
It goes by so quickly, and you don't have enough of it.
Yeah.
When you're single, it seems like, at least now looking back, hindsight being 2020, it seems like you have forever in a day to be able to do these things. And so that's what I would say is, if you are single, whether it be by choice or not by choice, having those relationships, like Gary, you just said, you know, I'd have relationships, but I wouldn't get married.
Yeah.
Having relationships with people and investing in people and being invested in by people and being held accountable and having just these sharpening iron type relationships are huge, and things that you can really grow during a time of being single. And that's part of the beauty of being single.
Yeah. You know what I was thinking as you were talking, like everything we've talked about on probably all of our podcasts, it's all perspective, right? So you could look at singleness as being a bad thing, or you could look at it being a good thing, or we put these meanings and definitions to it that aren't true. So like if I'm single, I'm not in a relationship, as you said. I know I have a small resume of being single to fall back on, but if I know what I knew now, I wouldn't think I was without a relationship. I would try to foster. This sounds really churchy and religious, and I don't mean it to be that, other than it's true. Instead of worrying about not being in a relationship, I would try to nurture the relationship I have with God.
Yeah.
Because, as you said, I mean, that's really what the Apostle Paul said. He said it's good to get married, but if you're not, you know how much ministry you could do. That's basically what he's saying. Because if you're married, you don't get to be out all the time. You don't get to wake up at 3 a.m. and go minister to somebody. You have a wife and children. You have responsibilities. So rather than looking at singleness of being alone without relationship, I think it might be a good thing if you step back and say, I'm going to nurture the one relationship I know I do have, and that is with God the Father, who loves me, and I'm not unloved being single. I'm not lonely being single, and I'm not void of a relationship being single, because God meets every one of those criteria.
So we've kind of skimmed the surface and talked about just the beauty of being single and how beautiful it is, and how it's a unique place that people can be, and how they can immerse themselves in it. I think the thing now that we need to do is kind of talk about what tangibly you can do with being single, and maybe give some more direction in that, and how you can embrace the beauty of being single. So I'd say for the first thing, that I think, if you are single, if you know someone who's single, the first thing is use this time to really find out who you are. Mm-hmm. And not only find out who you are, find out what you're passionate about, find out what you are purposed for, what God wants you to be doing. Take time to do that, to really dig in and really try to figure that out. I mean, you have opportunities to talk to people, to grow with people, to really see what it is you want to do with your life. That is the awesome part about this. Whether you're single in 20, or you're newly single at 30, or you've just always been single and you're older than that, you have the opportunity just to know what you're passionate about, and know where God has you, and move in that place that He has you.
So to that point is, once you identify that, stick some verbs to it. Ephesians 2, we all know 8 and 9, for by grace are we saved, but a lot of people just quickly do a drive-by on verse 10, and it says, for we are God's handiwork. You and I were God's handiwork that was created in Christ Jesus to good works. The last part is exactly what Jeremy was saying, which God has prepared in advance for you to do. That means there's something out there that has your fingerprints on it, are ready for your fingerprints because God's already created you to do it. So in this time of singleness, if you identify what you're passionate about, wrap it in some verbs and go out and do it. That's again, we started this whole podcasting, RP podcast, talking about happiness and fulfillment. When you identify your passion and you perform what you're passionate about, that's how you find that elusive thing we call happiness.
Well, and I'd also piggyback off of that and say that this is an awesome time to be undistracted. Is that a word?
Yeah, well, it is now.
It is now. I'm sorry. It's a long day. But to not be distracted by the opposite sex, to not be distracted by things that your family desires for you, as we talked about family pressure and friend pressure, not be distracted by that, but immerse yourself in finding out who God is too. I had a buddy, wouldn't call him a buddy. He was a guy I went to school with in college. And he said, you know what, for this whole first year, I'm not going to date anyone until I've read through and exhausted the entire Bible. And I was like, dude, you're crazy. Our college was known for ring by spring. You're not going to get there.
Get your MRS degree.
Yeah.
Yep, got it.
But he started doing that. And I think that's kind of a noble thing to do, is to say, you know what? And maybe it's not, hey, I'm going to read through the whole Bible, but maybe it's, hey, I'm going to spend every day starting with God or ending with God, and really trying to dive into his character, who he is, and that'll help me understand more what he wants me to do. Yeah.
Maybe once you identify that singleness can be beautiful, you find someone else who's single who's not there yet. Nothing is as fulfilling as pouring yourself into someone else. So you find, if you're a young girl, you find some girls who are out there settling. They're looking for love in all the wrong places. They need to know that it's possible. Maybe instead of letting them live vicariously through you, why don't you hook up with them, make a friendship, and mentor for them what that's like. Again, you start wrapping this singleness in verbs, and it starts to push all the distractions and the lies and the weird feelings. It pushes them at arm's length.
And the other thing I would say is it's a very good time to get to know yourself, to identify those places we talked about, baggage in a prior podcast. Well, maybe right now, without even being in a relationship, you have baggage that you need to identify and work through, and to a certain extent possibly fix before you get into another relationship. And so now is a good time, when you're single, to have that opportunity to really dive into that, and also just to dive into again, knowing more about who you are, knowing what makes you tick, knowing what pushes the needle for you.
Yep. And to that point, maybe you're single because you have baggage. It's always good. It's always good to work on that in the advance. It's always better to back into a relationship with a duffel bag instead of a 7-piece Louis Vuitton set. So that self-awareness. I had a lady say something, a Christian lady who meant well, who says, I'm really not all for the self-help movement. And I said, well, I'm not so much into self-help as I am self-awareness. Self-help says I can just do everything myself. But self-awareness says, here's who I am. I found out about myself. Here's my flaws. Here's my blind spots. Here's my weaknesses. And in this time of being single, I actually have time to focus on those. And as you said, repair, fix, tweak, amend, whatever they are. Again, singleness is a mindset. And if you reframe that mindset from, oh, this is terrible, I'm lonely, I'm an outcast, to what a wonderful opportunity I have in this season. Again, I think that's the word that we left out, is singleness is a season, and it's okay. You need seasons. So we were talking off air about what would be some good takeaways. So if you got a pen and paper, you can pause the podcast right now, go grab something. Welcome back, and let's think of some things out loud that you can do tangibly, that you write down to make this the most productive season you have. Number one, I would say this, as you find out who you are and what you're passionate about, Write for yourself a mission statement, how you want to conduct your life with or without a partner. A mission statement and then a vision statement hooked to that. Mission statement and a vision statement are simply this: where I want to go and how I'm going to get there. So it's okay to plan. Now, maybe you'll meet somebody who God will just tweak your life. If you saw Billy Graham's life story when he met his wife Ruth, she was going to go back to Tibet and be a missionary. She had that as her mission statement and her vision statement, and she met Billy, and God tweaked it. But that's okay. She had a purpose working up to that. So why don't you write a mission statement and see where you can go from there. Jeremy, you got any?
Well, yeah, I'd say definitely write what you're going to be about. You know, I think that's part of probably the mission statement itself, is writing tangibly what you're going to be about. I'm going to be about doing this. I'm going to be about pursuing this. I think, you know, you can think in your mind what you want to be about, what you want to kind of be your mission statement, your vision for your life, or what you feel like God's leading you to in those areas. Yeah. But the truth is, unless you get it down on paper, it's not, and have it as a visible, tangible thing in front of you. Yeah. Dreams go by the wayside a lot, you know? And so I'd say some of those things are dreams unless you write them down.
Absolutely. I have another one for your sheet here. Wonder if, and this is going to be different than what we've always heard. What if you wrote down what you have and what you want to offer when God brings that right person in? You know, it used to always be write a list of what you want in a spouse, which, you know, you remember we went through that book, Kiss Dating Goodbye, with all the young people? Like, what a stupid book. I can't believe we spent a lot of... I kiss dating goodbye, which really is not practical. It's like, because I'm on a diet, I don't kiss food goodbye. I learn how to manage food correctly. But and when you make this list of the perfect spouse, all you've really done, in all honesty, is write a list of all the things that you are about. So you're actually writing a list of finding the female or the male you. So instead of coming from that point of view, why don't you come from the other point of view? What I have to offer somebody and what I want to be able to offer that person God brings into my life. That takes it away from a selfish narcissism to now you're really prepared to do what we talked about in prior podcasts, to serve your spouse. So write those things down, what you have to offer and what you'd love to offer. Those things you don't have right at the moment, there's your to-do list before you find that lucky future relationship.
So we hope that that you do that. We hope that if you're single, that you understand that there's a beauty of it. There's an opportunity there. It's not a curse. I think some people think it's a curse.
Yep.
It's not a curse. It's an opportunity. Again, you need to reframe. Going back to our reframing podcast. Yep. But reframe and know that it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to serve God. It's an opportunity to find yourself. It's an opportunity to be in a place where God can use you, where he can't use other people. And so you have that opportunity, you have that ability in that season or in that lifetime to be able to just really use that in a beautiful way for God. We are going to continue next time on the thought of being single, but that's kind of the start that we wanted to give you guys. So please do that. I mean, write down your mission, write down your vision statement, figure out what your purpose to do, and hopefully that impacts your life and changes the direction of where you're going, or maybe improves the direction. Maybe you're already on a path, and that's just a thing to add on to it. But we hope that you do see that as a blessing, as a opportunity, and not as a curse. If you have feedback for us, you can always get a hold of us and give us feedback on any of our social networking sites, and that's facebook.com/RP Podcast, also Instagram @RP Podcast, and then on Twitter @the RP Podcast. You can also get all of our podcasts, past, present, future, on rppodcast.com. And we really do truly hope that this makes an impact on you, whether you're single or you're married, how you approach being single or approach people who are single in your life. And hopefully this is something that you can take and do something with and positively impact those lives. Anyways, we are glad that you listened, and we hope you have a great one.